Usually, the way that the powerful deal with situations like this is that they go for tactics that have withstood the test of time as being effective. And one of the most effective ones is character assassination. So I hope Chappelle doesn't have any skeletons in his closet, because a company like Viacom, if they instead push back and fight Chappelle, then they'll try to dig up as much dirt as they can to try to change the topic, try to discredit him, try to deflect so that the conversation is no longer about this, and so that he loses sympathy from people. All right, welcome to the Brown Perspective. This is RO, and I'm here with the one and only Eduardo Capetillo. ¿Cómo estamos?
Estamos bien aquí, listos y preparados para la conversación de hoy.
Ready for the fight? Chappelle's taking it to
Chappelle Show.
Yeah, he's taking it to Comedy Central. This is big. When I saw the video earlier today, and for those that haven't seen the video, there's a video that he posted on Instagram where he is openly discussing his struggles with Comedy Central and how he feels that they did him wrong. And so now he's decided to come out and use his platform to try to push back and try to force their will to try to make things right from his point of view. So that's, we'll get a little bit more into the specifics of that in this episode.
Yeah, and that's a great synopsis. And I think for me, one of the reasons that I think I love, and I think a lot of people love Dave Chappelle, is because he's such an amazing storyteller. Like, he can tell some amazing stories through his comedy. And I think that was what the Chappelle Show was. And obviously he also does that in his specials. And in some way, the first time I kind of sensed that there were issues going on was when he once again did the SNL opening and skits during right after the election. And once again, his monologue, he was able to not only process what was going on in his life, but what was happening for him and what has happened for him personally, but also applying it to what we were experiencing, and even acknowledging how Trump supporters must have felt like he did 4 years ago. So in any case, and then today for him to kind of use his life to tell a couple of stories that inform his decision and his approach to basically issue this ultimatum first it was an ask to fans to boycott the show.
Yep.
And B, it was making the offer to Comedy Central to, hey, I want to fix it. I want to work with you to address the wrong that I felt that you did on me. Let's do it. Hopefully we can do it in a civil way, in a way that is profitable and good for both of us. But I'm going to get my money. So it was just amazing how he kind of set the table for how he wants to treat this episode.
I've been following his career, his comedy, for a long time, and so I've watched a lot of the interviews that he did after he left Comedy Central. So I think you're right in that it was really when he did the monologue for Saturday Night Live that he mentioned that his show is going to be streaming both on Netflix and on HBO. But the struggle that he's had with Comedy Central began from the minute that he left the show, or as a result of whatever happened that led to him leaving the show, leaving $50 million on the table and walking away from it. He came back. He did an interview with I think it's the Actors Studio. He did an interview with Oprah, and he's done other stand-up. The specials that he did for Netflix, there's one where he's sitting in it's a small venue. It's not that many people. It feels more intimate. And I think he's wearing a black shirt and he's just sitting talking to people. And that's where he tells the story of I Slim. I don't know if you've seen that one, but where he's talking about how a pimp manages his horse, and he has his bottom hoe. And so it basically he's using it as a metaphor for how our rapacious capitalistic system treats people.
Woo.
And so he has always he's always talked that language of trying to give people hints that the way that artists are treated, the way that he was treated wasn't fair. And so I've always known that this is something that has bothered him, how he
Yeah.
ended up with Comedy Central. And people might think, well, he made 50 million from Netflix, right? Water under the bridge. He's a millionaire. It shouldn't bother him. It's like, nope, wrong, dijo Charlie Murphy. Wrong, wrong.
It's the principle. It's the principle.
In this special that he did now, this video that he released on Instagram, he tells you even more. He gives you more insight in terms of how much that's been bothering him, because he even accuses Comedy Central of destroying his life.
Yeah.
He says that he didn't smoke, he didn't drink before Comedy Central, and afterwards, he says that they're the reason why he started smoking.
And the fact that he can tell the story in 18 minutes, it's pretty remarkable.
He's such a great storyteller. And why don't we talk a little bit about the two stories that he shares with us about them serving as valuable experiences that help them grow in life, because I think they're directly tied to now the type of fight that he's taking to Comedy Central and the way that he's going about it.
Well, I can get started with the first one.
Yeah.
Which is the story about how he was a 14-year-old kid coming up with jokes, and coming up with a joke that was so popular that somebody tried to buy it from him. But at that time, he was so business savvy that he knew that he needed to create his content in order to be successful. The guy offered to buy it. He said no. And then the guy just said, well, I'm going to take it.
Yeah. Well, the guy asked him if he could borrow it, quotation marks around borrow.
That's right.
First.
And then buy it when it became really successful.
Yeah. And then on the second story that he tells is about a hustler who was hustling people out of money by being in it with the crowd, and then having a game of it was a game of cards, and I think you had to guess the color of a specific card. And Chappelle lost $60 in that, and those are the only $60 that he had, and he was supposed to take some girl out for that weekend, so he lost all his money. But then he was so upset, and also I suppose fascinated, because he thought that he was going to pick the right card with the right color. So then he sat there and he studied the game for long enough to understand that not only was the guy doing the hustling, it wasn't just him. He was everybody else around him shouting and making noise was in on it as well. And then the next person that came on to play, Chappelle warned him and said, "Hey, don't play that game. He's going to cheat you," and try to expose the guy. And then that's when the guy confronted him. This huge guy confronted him, and then when he saw that Chappelle was so afraid of him that instead of dishing out a beating, he took pity on him, and instead maybe saw him as this frightened young African American kid that needed some guidance, and he gave him some guidance. He said, "Young man, don't ever come between a man and his meal," and that's a lesson that stayed with him as well till now. And I think those two stories, the reason why he tells them is people can read different meaning into it. So the what I read into him sharing these two stories is that, at least in our society, people take as much from you as they can, as much as they can get away with. Mm-hmm. And so the guy that initially asked him if he could borrow his joke, and then he ended up stealing it. And then Chappelle told him, "No, you can't. I don't want you to use it." And he tried to buy it. Chappelle said, "No, I don't want to sell it." And then he says, "Well, I'm going to take it." He did it because he could. And the hustler that was hustling people, he was hustling people because he could. He could do it. Comedy Central locked him into an unfair contract because they saw that he was in need. And it's no different than what they do to other artists. And the industry does this because they can. And what Chappelle is doing now, he's saying, I can do something too. I can use my platform to put pressure on you to, as you can see here, Netflix has removed the Chappelle Show, and that wasn't because Chappelle put pressure on Netflix. He had more of a conversation, and they value their relationship with Chappelle so much that they pulled the show. Mm-hmm. But he's putting pressure on Comedy Central because I think what he's trying to get at is he's trying to make them come to the table and say, look, we're going to give you a cut because even though technically you signed the contract and we're within our rights to take everything from you, your name, your likeness, and make money off of it, he wants to put pressure on them so that they can come back and give him a cut of that because he feels that arrangement was unfair, and Comedy Central did it because they could. So now Dave Chappelle is doing what he's doing this now because he can.
Yeah, in some ways, Dave Chappelle got Walter Mercado-ed, and he lost. In some ways, he lost the rights to his name and to the winnings, the earnings from his show. Well, it's interesting because he also talks about Prince and the fact that was one of the main reasons why he changed his name to the artist formerly known as, because in the contracts they're so complicated, and they refer to them as the artist. And then I think the other powerful thing that he did was making it very clear that the same greed and corporate power that fought against him as a black man, as a poor black man, is the same force behind the Me Too movement and the allegations. So he also built some solidarity with that movement as well.
Yeah. And the other thing that I didn't mention about the reason why he shared especially the second story about when he was told not to come between a man and his meal, he's sending a message to Comedy Central saying that they're coming between him and his meal and his money.
Yep.
And so this is personal for him. And, at first, I wasn't sure what to make of it because this happens to a lot of artists. And this is why a free market capitalism, I don't want to get into that entirely, but this is why what so many people don't understand about the so-called free market is that the employer, in many instances, the employer has such an advantage that all of the leverage is on their side. And there's no better example than with artists in the entertainment industry and other industries as well. But entertainment, these guys are young. They're coming out. They don't even know how successful they're going to be yet. They're so happy to just get anything. A show, I mean, are you kidding? If you get a show, a comedy show, you're so excited about that. You don't, and you're so green. You don't have a team of lawyers to review contracts with you. Maybe after Chappelle comes out and does all this, maybe a lot of them will learn. But he didn't know. He didn't know what he was getting into. He didn't know that people could be so greedy as to steal his name, right? And so corporations have all the leverage when it comes to the negotiating with artists. What was Chappelle going to do according to free market system? He was going to take his talent somewhere else. I mean, it wasn't that many places that were going to give him a chance to do a show. So yeah, in that sense, Comedy Central, it's good. Kudos to them for giving him a show. But then they had all the leverage when it came to the negotiations. And
yeah,
so,
and he talked about the plantation model, how, if you had issues with a plantation, it's not like you could go to the other plantation.
Right. So as I was saying, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, look, Chappelle, he's a millionaire at this point. This happens to a lot of artists. What's the big deal, right? That could be one way of thinking about it. And that's, I think, how a lot of people are going to see it. He's not the only one. He's not the first, and he won't be the last. And he did sign a contract. So what's the problem there? And I think Chappelle does acknowledge that. And what he's saying is that the system is not fair, that it wasn't a fair deal. And so in that respect, more power to him if he can use his platform to put pressure on Comedy Central. Why? Because it's legal. There's no law to protect the network from what Chappelle is doing. So if these guys can be greedy and rapacious and screw young people out of millions of dollars, then Chappelle can use his platform to push back on them and in the process educate a lot of artists bring enough attention to this battle so that a lot of upcoming artists are more savvy about getting into contracts with these companies, and also maybe eventually, hopefully, have companies rethink how they approach trying to screw over young talent the way that they
Yeah.
screwed over Chappelle.
Yeah, and take advantage of them and not pay them fairly. And I think it happens in the entertainment industry, it happens in the music industry when you think about these platforms that are making platforms and labels that are making all this money while artists are only making like a few cents on each stream. So obviously they're using their art to get for others to get wealthy, and they don't get proper compensation for their talent and their art.
Yeah. Usually, the way that the powerful deal with situations like this is that they go for tactics that have withstood the test of time as being effective. And one of the most effective ones is character assassination. So I hope Chappelle doesn't have any skeletons in his closet, because a company like Viacom, if they instead push back and fight Chappelle, then they'll try to dig up as much dirt as they can to try to change the topic, try to discredit him, try to deflect so that the conversation is no longer about this, and so that he loses sympathy from people.
Hmm.
But it's hard to say at this point. It's really going to come down to how Chappelle's followers react, and not just his followers. I think let's see if he gets any support from other celebrities that are close to him, like a Joe Rogan with millions of views for every single podcast that he releases, and other celebrities. Let's see if they join in and side with him to try to put pressure on Viacom. I don't know if they would. This is more of a moral fight.
Hmm.
A lot of other people may choose to sit on the sidelines and say, well, this is more of his own personal vendetta. They might justify it by saying it happens to everyone, so what's the big deal? But we'll see. It's this is definitely took me by surprise when I saw this video today.
Yeah, and I think there's probably going to be, and to your point, there's probably going to be a lot of people who are going to support him and join in this fight. But I think the fact that he's even having the fight, and I think to your point, yes, they may look to downplay this, distract it, or do a little bit of character assassination. But also, if they play it right, it could be a redemption opportunity for them. But obviously, you can also see how they're going to try to fight it, downplay it, and not want to pay him what is due. But I think in some ways it's dangerous because if they accept guilt here, then there's probably going to be other artists and other people that are going to say, well, you treated me in a very similar way. Where's my compensation? And so I think they're also afraid of that rebellion
I
of the
think I think
artist.
artists should not wait until there is a verdict in this public fight. I think they
Mhm.
should join in right now and also
Yeah.
say, you've treated us unfairly and we're siding with Chappelle on this, because that's the only way that these companies do anything. The pressure has to come from the people, because it has to threaten their bottom line. Otherwise, they're not going to care. The first thing they'll probably say is, um, we were very open with Mr. Chappelle about the contract that he was signing. We offered to have people advise him, and we encouraged him to bring somebody to review the contract, and we feel that it was a fair deal, and he knew he was getting himself into. And at the end of the day, he signed the contract. Viacom did absolutely nothing wrong within the way that our system is structured. Nothing at
Mhm.
all. This is a moral fight, and we'll see if people have an appetite to try to help him um, fight this moral fight, to try to make things more fair for these artists.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see how whether or not he's successful in that or not. But I have a sense that he is, and I think just the timing of the release um, is interesting, right? So at a time where usually people would be traveling and doing other things, but because we're in lockdown, there's a lot of people who are watching the video, seeing this happen, and I think there might be more of an attention, a focus attention on something to support him and to see what happens, right? Because it could be, again, it could define the relationship between artists and the management, and to your point, it almost feels weird because it's almost like a civil war within the 1% or the 0.005% of people who are in this industry, but still you can see the fight for equity and fairness in this fight.
And he's already had the first victory with Netflix agreeing to
Yeah,
remove the Chappelle Show. Now
that's a
that's
big ally.
yeah, exactly. But that's also because he has a relationship with Netflix, so it's in their interest to work with them. He
Yeah.
doesn't have any relationship with HBO. They don't really stand to lose anything by keeping the show. They're just going to sit and wait to
And he
see.
also mentioned HBO, right? Because he did talk about how he pitched it to HBO,
Yeah, and
but
they turn them
they
down.
told him, yeah, that they didn't need him.
Yeah,
So, and it's funny because as we try to retell what he says in the video, it becomes obvious to me why he's such a great storyteller, and we are trying to get there.
yeah. At this point, I would go to a Chappelle show, and he could just tell stories and not tell a single joke, and I would still enjoy the show. And I think a lot of other people feel that way because that's the status that he's reached. It's at the level of George Carlin at this point. Because if you listen to
Hmm.
George Carlin's comedy, a lot of them was just him ranting against politics, against capitalism, and yeah, he'd sprinkle in jokes in there. But a lot of the times, you really went to Carlin to get an education. He was a
I have
philosopher.
to
Yeah,
acknowledge my ignorance, and I have to say that I don't know who George Carlin is.
yeah. Look, you know him. You just the name. If I show you the who he is, I'm sure you've seen his act as well. But yeah, yeah, he's such a great storyteller. It's a great comedian, and I'm rooting for him. I'm going to not watch Chappelle Show on Netflix. Won't watch it on YouTube. Won't watch it on HBO. I'm gonna make sure that I tell whoever I talk to, don't watch it. Boycott Chappelle Show.
Hmm.
It's a great show. One of the best, probably the best sketch comedy show out there ever.
But
It's
but
so
it's for
good.
the greater good, so so Chappelle can get the financial recognition for such a an amazing show and contribution, and hopefully he can now focus and continue to share his art with us.
Yeah, it's gonna be a tough one. I hope that he has enough of a following, loyal fan base that they can put the pressure on these companies. These companies will not relent. They won't give an inch unless it hurts their bottom line. That's just the way it
Hmm.
works. So he's taking the fight to them. He has the platform. He's big enough, famous enough that I think it's he has a good chance. We'll see though. We'll see. We need to see what the where the attacks are going to start coming from.
And when they're allies too,
Yeah,
it becomes an ally to him in his fight.
yeah. We'll see if the Rush Limbaughs, if the other conservatives take it and try to call him a whiny millionaire for trying to fight this personal battle because his feelings were hurt, right? Like you can spin this so many different ways, and people will, especially if Viacom mounts a full out attack against him, character assassination.
Hmm.
So stay tuned. It's gonna get interesting. We're at round one. Chappelle delivered a hook, and the opponent is on a knee. It's taking a 10 count,
Sus.
but this opponent is getting up. And round two is coming, round three, and we'll see if it goes the distance or if there's a knockout in one of
Hopefully, it's
these
not a
early
Mike
rounds.
Tyson fight, dude.
Well, if it's a Mike Tyson fight, if it's a Mike Tyson fight in Chappelle's favor, that'd be amazing.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah,
That would be good. But hopefully, it'll be more like a Pacquiao and was it Canelo fight?
Pacquiao Marquez.
There you go.
Those
See,
fights are amazing. Those four fights. Anyway, any final thoughts on this?
no, thank you for the conversation. I think it's safe to say that here at the Brown Perspective, we stand in solidarity with Dave Chappelle and what he's trying to do, and hopefully, more of you will support him in this fight.
Yeah, and we stand with all of the other artists that have gotten screwed over because they didn't have an overpriced lawyer or team of lawyers that could parse these like cryptic contracts that they have to read. And sometimes, as we learn from Walter Mercado, sometimes they just skim them, they don't even read them, and then they'll steal
Hmm.
your name, for perpetuity.
Yeah.
Perpetuity, not even as long as you're alive, not even 75 years after your death, 100 years, no, perpetuity.
Perpetuity. That's crazy.
Okay, entonces we'll leave it at that. If our listeners out there, if you like what you're listening, make sure to subscribe. We are The Brown Perspective. We're on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. Nos vemos.
Ciao.